Hey y'all, it's Amanda. So if you watched my case on Adnan Syed earlier in the week, then you know that I kind of gave a hint that I would be doing something a little different this week. I came up with the idea to do short stories on the weeks that I don't have a big case for you. That way it gives me time to do my research on the bigger cases, but you're not left hanging like you were for the past year. Sorry. So today we will be talking about the wrongful conviction of Sullivan Walter.
1986, I was falsely accused and tried and convicted for a rape that I didn't commit.
On May 10th of 1986, the female victim in this case was showering when a man entered her bathroom. He was covering his face with a washcloth and also had on a blue backwards baseball cap. He put a shirt over her head and walked her into an empty, unlit bedroom in the back of the house where he assaulted her at knife point. The man told the victim that he would not harm her 8-year-old son who was sleeping in the next room as long as she cooperated with him. When the assault was over, he got dressed and left the home. The victim actually hid in the bathroom for about 10 minutes before calling the police. When the police arrived, the victim, a white female, told the officers that it was a black male who had assaulted her and that his face was covered, but from time to time during the attack, the washcloth that was over the bottom half of his face fell down, so she thought that she could easily identify her attacker. She described the attacker as brown skinned, slender, tall, between 5'9" and 5'11", around 150 pounds, and between the ages of 18 and 22. She also said that his hair was styled in a jerry curl. He was wearing a backwards baseball cap. He had stubble on his face and thick eyebrows. 4 days following the incident, she assisted in creating a composite sketch of the man who assaulted her. In June of 1986, a little over a month after this crime was committed, Sullivan Walter was 17 at the time, and he was brought in on an unrelated burglary. The officer who actually arrested him on the unrelated charge thought that he looked similar to the composite sketch, so he notified the detective in the victim's case. 3 days later, a 7-person lineup would be presented to the victim, and she pointed out Sullivan Walter as the man who had assaulted her that night. Sullivan Walter was then indicted on charges of aggravated burglary and 2 counts of aggravated crime against nature. Although he was only 17 at the time of his arrest, he was charged as an adult. It must be disclosed that during trial, Sullivan Walter was represented by an attorney who had a lot of negative disciplinary actions filed against him. His defense attorney never presented an alibi during trial, and the detectives in this case never questioned him regarding an alibi.
They may be things that your family may not be able to do. Not that they don't want to help, but there are many families, many poor families that's unable to help.
On December 2nd of the same year, about a month after he was indicted, Sullivan Walter went to trial in a New Orleans district court. The main evidence in the prosecution's case was the eyewitness testimony and the composite sketch that they said looked similar to Sullivan Walter. On the morning that the trial began, the prosecution actually waited until that morning to give the defense a report by Harry O'Neill, who was a criminalist for the New Orleans Police Department, and those results were based on the seminal fluid that was found on the victim's shorts the night of the attack. At this time, the defense attorney could have asked for the trial to be delayed, since he literally got these results the day of trial, and there's no way he could get everything he needed to defend his client. O'Neill testified that the seminal fluid on the victim's shorts contained sperm. He also stated that further analysis showed the perpetrator of this crime was a non-secretor. Approximately 80% of men are secretors, which means when you're analyzing other bodily fluids, seminal fluids, saliva, you can actually pull that person's blood type from that fluid. However, 20% of the population that are non-secretors, which mean even though other bodily fluids may be available for testing, there's no way for them to actually pull the individual's blood type from the fluid. So the person who committed this crime was a non-secretor. So that automatically cuts out 80% of the male population. Sullivan Walter's attorney presented zero evidence in his case. And honestly, after researching this case, I hate to say it, but even if his attorney were to delay the trial because of these test results, I don't think he really would have ran the testing necessary. I mean, do a test to see if he was a secretor or non-secretor. While testifying at trial, the victim stated that there was no doubt in her mind that Sullivan Walter was the man who committed this crime against her, and there was actually contradictory testimony between the victim and the officer. At first, the victim stated that the perpetrator was clean shaven, did not have any facial hair. Later on, she would state that he had a few stray hairs, but the jury was never made aware of this inconsistency. The jury was also not made aware of the fact that when the man took her in the back room, it was nighttime and there was no light on in that room. So she was in a dark room with a man with his face covered. Sullivan Walter's defense attorney had this information marked as an exhibit, but he never presented it to the jury. His trial lasted 1 day before he was found guilty on all counts after the jury deliberated for around 3 hours. Walter was sentenced to 36 years in prison on the forcible count. The district court sentenced Walter to 35 years of hard labor with no possibility of parole during the first 2 years. On the other charges, he was sentenced to serve 15 years, and those sentences were able to run concurrently.
The day of my sentencing was devastating.
He spent 12 years in Angola. The rest of his time was spent in Elaine Hunt Correctional Centre.
I was angry because I didn't quite understand why.
After the trial, an appeals court would hear about the issue with the test results not being presented to the defense in this case prior to trial. And the crime lab had since done testing on Sullivan Walter and found out that he was blood type B and he was a secretor, which means he could not have been the individual that assaulted her. That alone would have prevented him from being convicted in this case had his defense attorney ran a simple test. Shockingly, the appeals court would deny his request because they stated even though the test results came back that he was blood type B and a secretor, that the eyewitness testimony was so powerful that they didn't think this extra information would have helped him in his case. So basically, the appeals court in this case said your scientific evidence is not as good as the witness's identification. That is insane to me. So you're telling me eyewitness identification is stronger evidence than scientific testing? That's crazy. The appeals court also used Sullivan Walter's attorney's lack of action during the trial when he received the test results as another reason not to overturn this conviction. The case was then sent back to the trial court so Sullivan Walter could file a motion for a new trial. On April 8th of 1988, there was a new hearing on Sullivan Walter's motion for a new trial, and his defense attorney finally presented the test results. The ones that would have acquitted him. We finally got here. It wasn't in the appeal. It was in the motion for a new trial. It wasn't in the original trial. It's crazy. It's crazy. Harry O'Neill testified and his testimony changed. He now stated that he could not be sure if the stains on the shorts were left by a secretor or non-secretor. If you remember in the first trial, he was definitely sure. Now that he knows the test results from Sullivan Walter, who was convicted of this crime, now his testimony changes. That happens a lot, sadly. Despite the analyst changing his story, Sullivan Walter's attorney did not cross-examine him. They asked him 0 questions. They did not question his change in testimony. They questioned nothing. and the hearing ended. It was over. 3 months after this hearing, the court would issue a written ruling denying the motion for a new trial. There is no transcript of this ruling anywhere. Not at the courthouse. No one has a copy of it. It's gone. There's nothing that we can actually look at to see what happened, why they denied the motion. Like, we don't know any of that. In September of 1995, an appellate brief was filed on Walter's behalf. The case was sent back to the Court of Appeals to determine whether a Brady violation had taken place in this case. A Brady violation is basically when the prosecution has evidence that would be beneficial to the defendant and the prosecution willingly withholds this evidence. And to be considered a Brady violation, it has to be determined that there would have been a different outcome. Once again, the court decided that there was no Brady violation because the eyewitness testimony was just that strong. After that ruling, Sullivan Walter had no legal assistance.
I've almost lost hope. I didn't think that anything would ever happen because I felt that, I was going up against a giant.
In October of last year, the Innocence Project in New Orleans actually picked up Sullivan Walter's case. And the first thing they realized was that the testing in this case showed that he was not the perpetrator. An expert report was filed showing that the testing done in this case was not done properly, and there was false police testimony given during trial in this case. His attorneys also brought forward the information that although the court believed that the eyewitness identification was such a strong point, the victim was in a dark room, the perpetrator had his face covered at any time that she was able to actually see him. Please do not misunderstand this when I'm explaining this. That does not mean that the victim was wrong in this case. The victim and what she went through, her trauma from that, I'm sure was excruciating. She thought she was doing what was best at the time. So I'm in no way victim blaming by bringing up the fact that the eyewitness misidentification was an issue in the trial. That's not her fault. But imagine seeing a stranger for a matter of seconds or minutes like this victim did. She was given a 7-person lineup. Be given a lineup of 7 people who look almost identical. That would be close to impossible. This is an issue with the courts that let this type of thing happen. Sullivan Walter is now 53 years old. He was released from prison on August 25th of this year after serving 39 years for a crime that he did not commit. So the huge issue here is witness misidentification. I wanted to look into how often this happens, why it happens, what we can do to change it, and I actually found that out of all of the people who have been exonerated in the United States, 69% of them were convicted due to eyewitness misidentification. When a stranger is involved, 1 in 4 people identify the wrong suspect in a lineup. So how does the court, or how did the court view witness identification as such a strong piece of evidence? And juries now, even to this day, think, oh, well, if they identified the person, then they most definitely did it. I mean, I'm not talking to anyone that's into anything in the legal field. I'm not talking me because I work in the legal field. I view things differently. But the average jury member, they're going to take it to heart if the victim is sitting up there and saying, yes, that's the person I saw. It's become a problem. Stress and anxiety can often lead to a suspect misidentifying the perpetrator of a crime. But did you know that the human memory actually fills in blanks? Like, say you're remembering something that happened, but you can't quite remember one detail. Your mind will actually fill that blank in unintentionally. There's nothing you can do to control it. That's how our brains work. And that's been an issue in the legal field because they put so much weight on eyewitness identification when it's such a faulty practice. After doing 30 years of research on this subject, the Innocence Project actually came up with some reforms that would benefit people that are accused of a crime and actually prevent this from happening. A double-blind lineup is one of the ways. Usually Usually when a lineup is shown, the administrator actually knows which person in the lineup is the suspect. So the administrator can actually give unintentional cues by body language, facial expressions that would actually cause the person viewing the photos to maybe pick someone just by the body language they're getting from the administrator. So by not letting the administrator or the victim know which individual is the suspect, it makes it more reliable if they're able to pick the suspect out. Many times victims will choose a suspect because they know that they're somewhere on the page, and that's not always the case. They don't always give you the suspect on the photo lineup. Sometimes they give you people they think could be related, but then the victim thinks, okay, well, if they're presenting you with this, then they know it's one of these people. So the Innocence Project came up with making sure that when you instruct someone that the suspect may or may not be included in the lineup. And that's a huge difference in just one sentence. Change one sentence and it'll make a difference. One of the reforms that would have specifically helped in this case was by not bringing attention to the suspect in the police lineup. We have 7 black men, but the suspect in this case was actually wearing a blue baseball cap backwards in the lineup. So that's the exact hat that perpetrator was wearing when he assaulted this woman. And then they put one man in the lineup with a backwards blue baseball cap on. I mean, what do you expect? She's going to see that and immediately think, yeah, that has to be him. He's wearing the same hat. Well, guess what? It wasn't him. And that is the detective's fault for making him stand out like they did. I really try to make everyone understand that all of these people that this has happened to, they all think that this would never happen to them. This happens to people every day. You could walk out of your house tomorrow and your life could be changed forever over something that you didn't even do. It's really important to me that wrongful convictions are made more aware to the public, because some people don't care about the fact that our criminal justice system is so messed up until they become a victim of it. And then it's too late. If you're wondering if your state has put any of these reforms in place, these 25 states have done so. If your state is not included in the green highlighted areas, I urge you to reach out to your local representatives to put these reforms in place. Or reach out to me, we'll draft a letter. We can also draft a public petition that you can share and have others sign. This is important to ensure that this does not continue happening. Let me know in the comments if you liked this new content or if there's any other content that you would like to see. Also, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because, you know, YouTube tells me about my subscribers, and 99% of the people that watch these videos are not subscribed. You might miss something good. I'll see you next week for our new big case that you will not want to miss.